We begin in traditional league fashion with the national anthem, the Pledge of Allegiance, and an exclusive bonus performance produced by award-winning musician Peter Breinholt and Utah's Rise Up Children's Choir.
Of the United States of America, and to the republic
for which it stands, one nation,
under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, the peace that was meant to be. With God our Creator, we are family. Let me walk with my brother, my sister in perfect harmony.
That's enough to make your eyes sweat to see that. Beautiful places around the state that we are fortunate enough to call home, and beautiful people, beautiful voices as well. So thank you for that. It's my honor to welcome you today to the annual conference of the Utah League of Cities and Towns, and this session. As I mentioned already, the theme this year is Respond, Recover, and Reimagine. These words speak pretty well to how I've felt about the last few years in public service, how I've felt this last year as president of the league. Before I get to that, though, it wouldn't quite be 2020 unless we went through a few of the 2020 memes that I'm sure we've all seen in different places over the interwebs. These come from a lot of them you can find on former Harriman City Council member Nicole Martin's Facebook page. If you need a good laugh or need to share a good laugh, feel free to follow it, because that's where a lot of these come from. First, one of the first ones I got in 2020 that made me chuckle was from the governor's chief of staff, Mike Maurer. You'll have to envision this one, or you can follow him and find it, I'm sure. But it was a circle of barbed wire, how they roll it up on a farm. And it said, this is the 2020 hula hoop. I'm sure everyone's laughing in digital world. I know Cam's giving that a good chuckle here. A few others. Let's see. Finally, 2020 has some good news. The Kardashians TV show is over after 14 years. Let's see. Next one that I've got written down here is, I know, this one made me chuckle. I know a lot of you haven't been able to go to Home Goods lately, so I just want to remind you to live, laugh, and love. That's my house right there. I don't know how many times we have that in my house. Airlines sending me "we're in this together" emails. When my suitcase was 52 pounds, I was on my own. What's something you started during quarantine but want to continue doing after it's over? Asking people to mute themselves. It's okay if you fall apart sometimes. Tacos fall apart and we still love them. And finally, this one I thought was good to end with here on the meme section. At what point can we just start using 2020 as a swear word? As in, that's a load of 2020. What in the 2020? Or abso-2020-lutely. Those are interchangeable, especially down in the country where I'm from, in Spanish Fork. We can use those quite a bit in our vocabulary. And with those, I can almost hear you all laughing in your jammies all over the state. So thank you for that. I'd like to go over Respond, Recover, and Reimagine. I brought some pictures that I think speak well to all three parts of our conference theme this year. You'll probably wonder here why a picture of a bull in the Respond. In Spanish Fork, you'll hear Cam refer to it as Spanish Fark often, and that's just fine. We like Spanish Fark, and we like Carn, and we like horses, and we like to go down by the creek. We're very proud of it. But in this fashion, this bull, one of the things we do in Spanish Fork is have one of the biggest and best rodeos that the PRCA has, and everyone enjoys it in the area. I was enjoying it last year, standing next to this chute, because my good friend, who's a bullfighter that takes care of the cowboys in Spanish Forks Rodeo, Fiesta Days Rodeo, asked me to come down there and take some video of him and use his phone to get some close-ups. So I did that. And as I did that, I was leaning against this fence, and I had my Wranglers on. And when you get your Wranglers in during Fiesta Days time, I think you have to sign a waiver with Reams on Main Street in Spanish Fork that you cannot show any pain while you have Wranglers on. You certainly can't cry and things like that. And so when I'm leaning up against this fence, long story short, that dark, really tough bull right there took a good crack at me and hit me right in the knee through the fence there. I, of course, turned around, wondered what was that, and chuckled because there was a bunch of other cowboys around and I couldn't let them see that I was in excruciating pain. I thought for sure I was going to be to the hospital next. But no, I limped it off, did fine, got through it. So while I'm feeling sorry for myself, the next slide that I brought for you is a video of what Joe experienced shortly after my excruciating knee pain from the bull. In case you missed that, Joe went out there, saved a bull rider, and got between the bull rider and the bull, was knocked nearly unconscious, but he recovered. He recovered quickly, got out of the way, continued to fight bulls that night and take care of more cowboys. Reimagine. Joe's face got reimagined just a little bit. I imagined, I know Joe reimagined his career choice at that time of what to continue on doing. You'll be happy to know that Joe, yes, he's okay. He recovered. He did reimagine his career. He works as a bullfighter still, but as a ag banker as well in Spanish Fork. So I thought those spoke well to our theme this year of respond, recover, and reimagine. In one way or another, that's what we've all had to do in our public service lives. With politics becoming more divided, the rise of social media that seems like it creates a pathway for everyone to be a credentialed reporter, to talk about maybe gossip and rumors and have misinformation. You can get bogged down in all of those reasons of maybe why not to get involved in public service. But I think that's an important point, and that's the moment that we should all remember who we campaign to be in public office. The simple and pure reasons of respecting each other, collaborating where we can, and helping lift for better outcomes in all of our communities. My day job, when I'm not a city councilman in Spanish Fork, is spent in the financial planning and investment world, and I help people plan for their futures. In that role, you have to be a realist, a pragmatist, but you have to definitely be an optimist. And that's what we have to do in our communities. That's what you are to your communities. You speak truth to your constituents, but you are hoping and helping and creating better days for your communities. The real estate listings in your city, if you think about that, and I talk about that to people from time to time, think about that, what that is in your city. Obviously, they don't lead if they're selling a home, in Murray or in anywhere, Kaysville, Spanish Fork, name it. They don't lead with the toilet's flush, the garbage is picked up, the taxes are low. Those are necessary and important things. Public safety, hugely important in all of our communities. But what do they lead with in those? They lead with quality of life. They lead with this house is this close to a walking trail. It's just down the street from a library. It's really close to a park that you can enjoy with you and your family. So remember that in your service as well, especially in a year where those things can somewhat get lost in all the emergencies, all the important things that we have to take care of for our constituents. That quality of life is important for us to grow, protect, and continue to maintain for each of our communities. A few of the mentors, I'm going to leave you with this, that I've met since being involved with the Utah League of Cities and Towns for a few years now. And I'll never forget these, is number one, run for office or else a politician will. The pothole does not have a D or an R next to it. It just needs to be fixed. Taste your words before speaking them. That's a good one for us Spanish Fork people that like to talk sometimes quite a bit, but tasting those words before you let them out of your mouth. And don't be afraid to learn and grow from other people's insights. I want to leave you with this. I've grown a lot. I've learned a lot in public service, and especially serving as the president with all of you in the Utah League of Cities and Towns. But my most recent learning came from families that we invited to tell us about their needs at our All Abilities Park in Spanish Fork. So many items that are in that park that I would have never known, would have never thought of, and neither would have our Parks and Rec department. But we invited those families specifically in to tell us about what their needs are, what they've seen work well at other parks, what they haven't seen work so well. And the culmination of listening and loving with those residents has resulted in an 11-acre piece of heaven right in the middle of Spanish Fork City. So I'd encourage you to continue to do that, to make sure you're listening to your constituents. Do that. The more we can collaborate with them, truly the better outcomes that we can have. 4 years ago during this conference, I spent a week with my youngest son, Jagger, in the NICU, recovering from issues. And a year after that, during the same time, I spent time with my brother going through colon cancer diagnosis and treatments. And those two times, when September rolls around like it is now, always remind me of this conference, but remind me of those points too, that the great equalizer in all of our lives is time. And what do we do with it? Well, I know, and I know I'm preaching to the choir when I'm talking to all of you out there listening, that time has to somewhat be allocated to helping others along their way. And that's what you do for your communities. That's why I've loved serving with you. I've enjoyed serving as president of the organization. The Utah League of Cities and Towns will always hold a special place in my heart, my family's heart. I'm better because I met all of you. And I'm grateful for your friendship and your mentorship. It's been truly an honor, and I'll continue to do what I can to help lift others just like you do in all of your communities across this great state of Utah. So thank you again, and we'll see you all very close, I'm sure. Thank you. Next, Susan, you're helping me with what's next. I know what's next because it's one of my good friends that I do count as a really good friend in the side of teaching and learning, and has taught me a lot through public service. It's been a pleasure to get to know him, a pleasure to stand next to him, whether it's in committees on Capitol Hill or just a friendly discussion. First, the introduction of one of our league sponsors, Zions Bank, who supports the league tremendously and makes it possible to bring you quality conferences and training just like this. I'd like to turn it over for a minute to our good friend Rob Bruff from Zions Bank.
Well, thank you, Mike. It's great to be here with you. And on behalf of Zions Bank, I want to thank each of you for the great work that you do every day throughout our state. We recognize that the greatest impact on the individuals, families, and businesses across our state happen at the local level through the work that each of you do every day, and we thank you for it. We're honored to be a supporter of the Utah League of Cities and Towns, and equally proud and honored to count many of you among our great clients. I know that Zions Bank needs no introduction for many of you, as we have been a part of the communities throughout Utah for nearly 150 years. However, some of you may not be familiar with all of the services that we are able to provide your cities and towns, as well as each of you individually. We, of course, provide all of the traditional banking products and services that you would expect from a financial institution, including checking and savings accounts, loans for homes, cars, RVs, and businesses, credit cards, and so many more things. However, we also provide other services with which you may not be as familiar. These services include the best in the industry cash management services, including purchase cards, ACH, and more. We offer corporate trust services, institutional wealth management, non-traditional lending products, and public finance expertise, including advisory services, purchasing, underwriting, continuing disclosure, and consulting on a variety of financial and economic topics. We also provide exclusive local and national economic reports that are available to you in your communities and for your use. At Zions Bank, we recognize that banking is a local business, and we are committed to being actively engaged in important community issues and to help provide creative solutions to community needs, including helping your municipalities meet your banking needs. Thanks again to each of you for all that you do in your communities and for allowing Zions Bank the opportunity to help you to continue to create value for the individuals, families, and businesses that call your cities and towns home. We hope that you continue to enjoy the conference, and we're proud to be a part of what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Zions Bank, for your important partnership with the League of Cities and Towns and Communities across the great state of Utah. We appreciate that. Next up is one of my good friends as well. Our conference this year is in partnership with the Wasatch Front Regional Council and the Utah chapter of American Planning Association. We are pleased to hear from their best, from the executive director of the Wasatch Front Regional Council and my good friend, Andrew Gruber. Andrew.
Thank you, President Mendenhall, and hello, everyone. Of course, the focus that we all have right now is on recovering from the public health and economic impacts of the pandemic. So I want to start by saying thank you. We're living in unprecedented times, and the degree of commitment and sacrifice that you all have shown in serving your communities is remarkable and inspiring. But it wasn't that long ago that much of our focus was on managing the impacts of being the fastest growing state in the country. So now we're really facing twin challenges of recovery and growth. While these issues are real and weighty, we know in Utah that when we work together, we can meet even the toughest challenges. So WFRC is happy to be joint sponsors of this conference with the League and the Utah chapter of the American Planning Association, where we have the opportunity to come together to discuss and plan for the future. With this in mind, you'll see that one theme at this conference is on exploring solutions to the challenges of growth under the broad umbrella that we refer to as the Wasatch Choice Vision. We're a diverse mix of communities in our state, and there's no one-size-fits-all approach to handling our growth issues. But the Wasatch Choice Vision is a helpful frame of reference as you develop the approaches that best serve your community's needs. I'll have more opportunity to talk with you tomorrow about the vision, but as you've likely noticed in perusing the schedule, there are a number of sessions related to these topics around growth, transportation, housing, economic development, and how they're impacted by the pandemic. I hope you'll take advantage of these sessions and then apply the strategies in your own communities. I know that together we can not only meet our challenges, but turn them into opportunities that enhance our quality of life now and into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you so much for partnering with us on the conference and sharing the Wasatch Choice Vision. Very important for our cities and towns and the state as a whole. It's now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for today. You're in for quite a treat. It's my pleasure to introduce Reverend France Davis. After 50 years in the ministry, Reverend France Davis retired last December as the beloved pastor of the Calvary Baptist Church in Salt Lake City. But his influence and commitment to service extends to those of all denominations in Utah, as well as civic and educational leaders. But let's back up a moment, a few decades to be exact, key turning points in our nation's history. France Davis was active in the civil rights campaigns of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. He joined the March on Washington in 1963 as Dr. King gave his I Have a Dream speech. He walked the Selma to Montgomery, Alabama voting rights March 1965. In 1972, he came to Utah as teaching and fellow graduate and student at the University of Utah. 2 years later, he began his ministry with the church. And that began the legacy of building bridges that would bind the many diverse elements of our entire Utah community. It's my honor and my pleasure to welcome you to the stage, and as a league, welcome the good Reverend France Davis.
Thank you, President Mendenhall, to all of you members of the League, to each of you that are present in this space, and those of you who are virtually watching and observing and participating in the League's annual session for this year. I'm delighted to have been invited to be the keynote speaker, and as such, I want to spend a little time and talk to you about your theme, Respond, Recover, and Reimagine. And I want to do that in light of the pandemics that we are experiencing today. You'll notice I use the word pandemics with an S, indicating that I believe that there's not just one pandemic, which is viral, but there also is a racial pandemic that is going on, that has been going on for many years here in our country. And so at least those two, plus we could add the political and the social as well as the economic pandemics that are happening in our countries. So I want to talk a bit about those and light of your theme. I want to share three main ideas. Number one, I want to say some things about historically where we have come from. And then I want to say a couple of things about where we are presently. And then lastly, leave some time to talk briefly about what I think would be helpful for the days that are yet ahead. I was born during the days of separate but equal in a little place in Georgia, about 100 miles from where Martin Luther King Jr. was born. And when I was born in those days of separate but equal, all of the public facilities run by the cities and towns, by the government, by anybody in our community were separated into two groups. And by the way, there were only two groups that lived in America in those days. Either you were light-skinned enough to be considered white only, or dark-skinned enough to be considered colored. Well, everything was separated so that the water fountains, if you wanted to drink, you had to find the right water fountain. If you wanted to use the public restroom, you had to find the right one, the one that was marked white only for those who were light-skinned and for colored for those who were dark-skinned. Not only did you have to find the right space in a public facility, but even the riding on public transportation was restricted, so that if you rode on the train and you looked like me, then you had to ride in the front of the train. If you rode on the bus, you rode in the back. If you rode on a boat, you were in the bottom. And of course, here in Salt Lake City and other places, there were signs that hang outside of the theaters that said colored entrance to the balcony. And there were those in those days who determined that they were going to keep each of the colors in their respective places. And my question is, what place? What place for colored citizens? Is it up front? Is it in the back? Is it up top? Or is it down below? Well, when I came along, all of those places were places that were relegated to people based on their skin color. Now, this is a historic problem. It goes all the way back to 1787, when Article 1, Section 2 of the United States Constitution defined people in three different ways. Some were considered by the Constitution, when counted for representation and taxation purposes, as whole persons. Others were considered as no person, and still others were considered as 3/5 of a person. With the Constitution, the finest document for governing any country in the world, setting forth now a definition for the peoples of the world, we had a problem of how do we ensure equal protection under the law. Equal protection for people who are considered whole persons, those that were considered to be no person, and those who were considered as 3/5 of a person. Well, eventually, after 1787, in the 1840s, a man named Dred Scott was moved from one territory to the other, and he decided that since he had been moved from slave territory to free territory, that surely he would be entitled to be a free man. So he filed an action in the courts of our land, and they got all the way to the highest court of the land, the Supreme Court of the United States of America. And the Supreme Court concluded that Dred Scott, for all intents and purposes, was not a human being. In fact, the court said that there are no rights which a Negro has that a white person is bound to respect. So we've got the Constitution, first of all, deciding that some people are full people, others are no people, some are 3/5. And then the highest court in the land interprets the law and concludes that a person who is considered colored is not considered a human being for legal purposes. A few years later, a young man who had been running for office for various chores, for various responsibilities, perhaps mayor of some city, perhaps councilman of some city, perhaps dog catcher, perhaps police chief. He had been running for office and couldn't win anything. So he decided to run for the President of the United States of America, and ran on, included in his plaque, one idea that blacks were as much citizens of our country as anybody else was. You see what we're trying to do? We're trying to make right what the Constitution has set forth as the legal definition of people who are considered colored in our society. Interestingly, slaves in places were not set free by the person who won the presidency of the United States. He did issue an Emancipation Proclamation, but that Emancipation Proclamation declared that the slaves were free in territories, quote, that were in rebellion against the Union. So the Congress then had to step in. Congress stepped in and passed the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment to the Constitution, making slaves free, granting them citizenship rights, and giving them the right to vote. And by the way, we are fast approaching the time for all of us to get up and go and vote for our national offices as well as our local. And for a time period, people of African American descent who were considered to be colored, after the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, for a time period, they were in fact fact, enjoying the blessings of being equal. They were elected to Congress. They were serving in various responsibilities in their respective communities. And then all of a sudden, there rose an organization called the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan. And by the way, Dr. Larry Gerlach has written a wonderful book about the KKK and its history here in the state of Utah. It's entitled Blazing Crosses in Zion. And in that book, he documents the fact that the Klan were alive and well in the state of Utah. So in the middle of the 1870s then, things were turned back, and blacks who were starting to experience a relative amount of freedom found themselves once again not to be considered under the law as equal citizens. Finally, the Supreme Court ruled in the Plessy versus Ferguson Supreme Court case and put into concrete this notion of separate but equal. In the Plessy versus Ferguson Supreme Court case, the court ruled that separate but equal was in fact the law of the land. Blacks attended then substandard schools. They sat at old desks. They read used textbooks. They had teachers that had not graduated from college in some cases, and when they did, there were colleges that were not accredited, and many of those who were graduated were serving as the leaders in the community. I never read a new textbook. Can you believe it? I never read a new textbook until I got to college. I never sat at a desk that did not already have carved on it that somebody loved another person, so I couldn't carve who I loved. And I never rode on new buses when being bused away from the nearest school to other schools. In fact, what I was forced to do was to live, and in those days when I was born, be a part of what is called separate but equal. Indeed, the law was separate but equal, but the facilities were not equal. They were separated, but not equal. I remember, for example, when I first went to college, I left my hometown in Georgia and was going to college in another city, to a small college called Tuskegee, started by Booker T. Washington and popularized by George Washington Carver, who invented peanut butter, by the way. And on my way to college, we got to the bus station, and there I had to go to the back window at the bus station in order to retrieve a sandwich that I was paying for out of the window, and then sit on a log outside of the bus station and eat it. All of the doctors in my community, all of the doctor's appointments that my family made were made for 8 o'clock in the morning, but no doctor ever came through the wall to tend to those colored patients until the afternoon. So my parents took a sandwich and something to drink whenever they went to the doctor. If they wanted something to eat or drink during the day, they'd have to take their own. And when traveling, we would travel in automobiles, and this record, by the way, is documented in a little recently released movie entitled The Green Book. But when African Americans travel, they carried their food and they ate it cold, and they stayed in their cars for the most part. In fact, The Green Book says that in Salt Lake City in 1939, there were only 2 places in the state of Utah that African Americans could stay, other than private homes. You could tell those houses of African Americans because they had no paint on them, and no electrical power, while the houses of others had paint on them and had electrical power and running water. Well, we were stuck, it seemed, in separate but equal after the Plessy versus Ferguson Supreme Court case. But fortunately, there came along people like Jackie Robinson, Martin Luther King Jr., Ralph Abernathy, and finally, the Supreme Court of the United States of America ruled on May 17, 1954, that separate but equal was inherently unequal. And the court's ruling decided that public facilities ought to be integrated. Soon thereafter, in December 1955, Mrs. Rosa Parks got on the bus, and after a long day of hard work, sat in the first empty seat in the colored section that she came to. When she was told to get up and give her seat to another person simply because his skin color was different, she refused, saying, "My feet is tired." Newly arrived in Montgomery, Alabama, though, were 2 wonderful, well-trained, highly educated ministers, the Reverend Ralph Abernathy and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Neither of them had burned any bridges. Neither of them had many enemies yet in the town, and so they formed the Montgomery Improvement Association. And in August 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King and others led a march on Washington, where he delivered his most famous speech. "I have a dream that one day my 4 little children will be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." Shortly thereafter, the Congress of the United States of America and the President of the United States passed and signed into law the 1964 Civil Rights Act, restating and guaranteeing the rights of all citizens to be citizens and to have access to equal protection under the law. And then I was a part of, just a few years ago, right here in this very room, in fact, Mrs. Michelle Obama came to Salt Lake City as her husband was running for the highest office in the land. He won and became the President of the United States of America. And we thought, or we knew, or rather we assumed that surely we have arrived. Surely we have arrived. But just a few weeks ago in Minneapolis, in Louisville, Kentucky, here in Salt Lake City, and other places around the country, African Americans discovered that name-calling, off-color jokes, killings by the powers that be, the use of the N-word, were problems that still existed and that people still were not treated the same under the law. I remember a young black lady who decided to be a policeman once. And she went to the academy and was certified as a police officer in her community. She had her own car that was assigned to her, her radio that was given to her, and she was told that these other officers will back you up. Well, she overheard on the radio in her car. The voices of some of her fellow officers saying, "Leave her out there. Leave her out there. Let's see how she handles this by herself." Today she's a college admissions officer instead of a policeman because of that. Racism is a negative. Racism is a problem that we all have, and it's systemic in many places around our country. People like Bull Connors, police chief, Governor George Wallace, and others like them are still waving the flag of inequality in our country. So what do we need to do in these days? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let me suggest a number of things. We are in the midst of a viral and a racial pandemic, and extreme measures have to be taken. Cover up and stay safe, one of the rules for the viral pandemic. Wear a mask, another rule for the viral pandemic, which, by the way, seems to be reinvigorated now in certain parts of our country. And since May 25th, when George Floyd was murdered, protests all over the world, and in many places, people are senselessly burning and looting. By the way, Dr. King said that violence is the language, that rioting is the language of the unheard. So we've got to hear all of the people. A riot is the language of the unheard, and what is unheard in America has failed to be heard anywhere around our country. So I've come to suggest 2 or 3 things. Number one, I suggest that cities and towns would do well to take a look at Camden, New Jersey, and Newark, New Jersey. Camden, New Jersey has decided that they were going to establish a community force and put it in place. And they put it in place. And now 50 to 90% of the crime in that community has disappeared. Newark, New Jersey has now a community force that they send out, and whenever 911 is called, a community force responds along with the policeman. And when they respond, they are able, in most cases, to talk with restraint and control, and to allow time for the officers to rethink their policies, their practices, and their behaviors. An attitude change is required. The problem affects everybody. And if we do not educate all of our citizenry, then none of us will be adequately educated. If we leave some people homeless without health care, we who have homes and health care will pay more. Here are 2 or 3 other specific suggestions. I suggest that, number one, that we take racism and bullying seriously. Take it seriously. It's a problem. Number 2, get involved and do something to settle the status quo. Do not just sit on the sideline. Number 3, register and go to the polls and vote, and help others to know that their vote counts. Some years ago, I was a professor at the University of Utah, and during my class, it was nearing time for the election, and so I asked my class, how many out of 60 students, how many of you are registered to vote? 2 hands were raised. We then insisted that we help those to get registered who were not, and we got everybody, as best we know, everybody in the class was finally registered. And then there came a day to vote. And on that day, the day after, we asked how many of you went to the polls yesterday and voted. And out of 60, 10 actually went to the polls. So not only is it registering to vote, but it's also finding a reason, being adequately educated about the need to vote. Number 4, use your privilege and power to bring about change, especially in the way that authorities treat people. De-escalate is a better strategy. Number 5, be a friend to a person not like you. Number 6, study and get insight to be fully aware. Number 7, change the laws, change the policies, and for goodness sake, change the practices. Number 8, create diversity in the workplace. And what would happen if in every city in Utah, what would happen if in every city there were a diversity of people employed by not just one person, but a diversity of people in every department? Number 9, teach your children not to do what others are doing wrong. And number 10, remember that every person has worth and something to contribute to the conversation, something to say. Young black men are endangered species these days. They are found hanging in town squares, being killed by vigilante groups, choked to death, shot and killed with no reason, with knees on their neck. Peter Breinholt, a 12-year-old black boy, summed it up in these words: I just want to live, he sang. He sang, I am a young black man. Look what's been done to my kind every day. Hunted is prey, don't want no trouble. I just want to live. The poetry of Langston Hughes reminds us of this better than anybody when Langston writes a poem entitled, I Too Am America. Let me say then, in the words of Dr. Martin Luther King as I conclude, I've always said it this way and will say it again. Be what you is and not what you ain't, because if you ain't what you is, then you is what you ain't. Thank you to members of the League, to Mr. President, to all of you that are gathered here in person, and those of you who are virtually participating in this conference. I hope and pray that your conference will be of grand success and that you'll leave better than when you came. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Reverend France Davis. I am sure across the cities and towns in the state of Utah, there are applause and people nodding to each other with that great address to our membership. We appreciate it so much. I am the father of a teenage son, and sometimes when you say that, it doesn't follow with how proud you are of a teenager. But I will tell you this. In February, pre-pandemic, we were on a trip with the Utah League of Cities and Towns and attended the National League of Cities and Towns conference in Washington, D.C. And I asked my young son, my teenage son, Nash, of 13 years old, to come with and see some of the sights in Washington. I was proud of Nash when I asked him, where did you want to go? And the first thing he said is he did want to stand where Martin Luther King Jr. gave his speech on the Washington Mall. And we went there. We went there first. He is going to be very happy for me to report that I met somebody who was there as well today. And thank you to the teachers that educate our youth and educate them in the importance of what the good Reverend just spoke about. A couple of things. The business session, first of all, begins tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. You can register to vote for that business session in the app. So make sure you download the app for the conference and that you are registered to vote. There will be important business taken care of tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. in the business session. What I'd like to do now is invite you to participate in the roundtables and the workshops, the discussions that you've selected in the conference app or on the website. When you get into the app or the conference website, you can choose to join the discussion and join right away. If you have any questions, you'll find instructions at the League website, www.ulct.org. Again, from me to you and all of you across the state in your respective cities, enjoying this conference virtually and especially enjoying our keynote speaker this morning. Have a great conference, and thank you again for your involvement and your contribution to the Utah League of Cities and Towns. Thank you.